This time, we will look at the average egogram of people with high CP. Here, a high CP score means that the person's CP score is within the top 10% among all test participants. The total number of participants is 8,255. Among them, 890 people are in this group, and the ratio is 10.8%. The standard is the top 10% in CP. When we look at the average scores of their 6 ego states, CP is 41.3, NP is 35.5, A is 34.9, FC is 33.6, AC is 34.9, and SC is 35.1, compared with the overall average. CP is 9.3 points higher than the overall average of 32.0. So the first thing that stands out is, of course, CP. However, there is one important point here. These are not people who have only CP at a high level. The other 5 ego states are also not lower than the overall average. However, because CP stands so far at the front, CP is likely to be seen first in actual relationship scenes. When we look at people with high CP, the first point to remember is this. These are people whose standards are seen first. CP is the force that sets standards, responsibility, order, and boundaries inside the mind. So when CP is high, these questions are likely to come up first when the person looks at a scene. Is this right? Is it all right to do it this way? Is the responsibility clear? Are the standards becoming loose? Because of this, people with high CP may find it difficult to simply pass over a loose scene. They may feel uncomfortable when assigned work is handled carelessly. They may also feel tension in situations where the boundary of responsibility becomes unclear. In relationships, these people are often seen as responsible people, people with clear standards, and people who do not pass things over carelessly. However, it is not enough to see this structure simply as a strict person. When we look at the graph, CP is the highest, but the other 5 ego states are also not lower than the overall average. NP, A, FC, AC, and SC are all alive to some degree. However, there is a gap between CP and the other ego states. CP is 41.3, and the other ego states are gathered between 33.6 and 35.5. In other words, these people are not people who lack the other ego states. However, because the CP is too far at the front, the other ego states are easily hidden behind it. This difference is important. Being low and being behind are different. It is difficult to say that these people have no warmth. NP is also higher than the overall average. However, in ordinary relationships, standards may be seen before warmth. It is also difficult to say that these people have no judgment. A is also higher than the overall average. However, in ordinary relationships, firm standards may be felt before calm judgment. It is also difficult to say that these people have no playfulness or expression at all. FC is also not lower than the overall average. However, in first meeting relationships, responsibility and order may be seen before light expression. It is also difficult to say that these people have no cautiousness. AC is also similar to the overall average. However, rather than first following the relationship, they are closer to setting a standard first and then using cautiousness inside that standard. It is also difficult to say that these people have no personal color. SC is quite higher than the overall average. However, their personal color is also more likely to appear inside the frame of standards and responsibility than to appear freely from the beginning. Because of this, a person with high CP may look different in ordinary relationships and in close relationships. In ordinary relationships, standards are seen first. Responsibility, firmness, principles, completeness, and order are seen first. However, in close relationships, another side may appear. When tension is released, when the person feels safe, or when CP has held on for a long time and becomes tired, the other ego states that were behind may appear. At that time, close people may see these sides. A side that looks firm on the outside, but was actually paying a lot of attention. A side that usually looks strict, but takes care of close people. A side that is serious outside, but unexpectedly becomes playful in a comfortable place. A side that looks unshaken on the outside, but is cautious because the relationship might break. A side that seems always to talk about standards, but actually wants to keep its own way and direction. Because of this type can easily have sides that only close people know. Outside, the person is seen as a person of standards. In close relationships, the warmth, fatigue, playfulness, cautiousness, and personal way behind those standards may be seen together. At this point, what matters is not to see CP negatively. CP is a necessary force. It sets standards, holds responsibility, and restores order that has become loose. However, if a CP is seen too early, the good intention behind it may not reach the other person. The person may have meant, I said it so things could go well. But the other person may feel, I was criticized. The person may have meant, I was trying to take responsibility. But the other person may feel, I was pressured. The person may have meant, I clarified the standard. But the other person may feel, it feels like I am being scolded. So the tuning needed for a person with high CP is not to remove the standards. It is important to keep the standards, but to show the other ego states behind those standards a little earlier. For example, this can be done in this way. This part can become better. I know you worked hard, and I think we can adjust the standard a little. I'm speaking strongly because I see this work as important. I do not mean that it is wrong. I mean that we can make it more stable. These small sentences do not lower the firmness of CP. They simply deliver the warmth of NP and the explanation of A behind that firmness. To summarize, people with high CP are not people who have only standards. The other ego states are also not lower than the average. However, because CP stands so far at the front, standards and responsibility are seen first in ordinary relationships, and the other ego states are easily hidden behind them. So when we understand these people, it is better to look at them this way. We should look not at what is missing, but at what is seen too early. A person with high CP may show the energy of standards not only in words but also in the body. However, non-verbal expressions are not a judgment table. We cannot look at one body gesture and say, this person has high CP. Non-verbal expressions are only reference material. When facial expression, posture, gaze, tone of voice, and distance repeatedly show the same direction, we can carefully estimate which ego state is standing at the front inside that person. A flow that can often be seen in a person with high CP is a direction in which the body does not easily become loose. The posture may be relatively upright. The person may sit with the back straight, or the center of the body may not collapse easily. There may also be tension in the shoulders or neck. This kind of posture can give the feeling that this is not a scene to pass over carelessly. The facial expression may not relax easily. The brow may come together slightly, or even when the person smiles, the smile may remain restrained rather than spread widely. The other person may see this expression and feel, am I being evaluated right now? The gaze may be relatively clear. Rather than avoiding the person may look directly or may look as if checking the situation. This gaze can give trust, but at times it may also be felt as pressure. Hand gestures may be short and clear rather than wide and soft. Movements that point to a direction, divide items, or draw a line may appear. The person may also listen while keeping the arms or hands fixed. The tone of voice may be organized. Rather than letting sentences flow at length, the person may speak in separated sentences, using firm expressions such as this has to be done this way, the standard is this, and that part needs to be checked. This kind of tone helps organize the situation. However, when the other person is not ready, it may sound like criticism or evaluation. Standards may also appear in the way the person uses space. The person may clearly hold their own place and role and naturally come to the center when standards are needed in a meeting or gathering. This is not bad. However, even if the person feels that they are sitting and speaking as usual, the other person may already be tense. So a helpful question for a person with high CP is this: are my facial expression and posture speaking the standard before my words do? The core of nonverbal expressions is not a scolding gesture. It is the direction of the body that places standards at the front. This direction of the body can show responsibility. At the same time, it can lower the temperature of the relationship. Therefore, a person with high CP should tune not only the content of their words, but also the tension in the body and the strength of the facial expression. Now, for comparison, let's also look at the average of people with low CP. Here, a low CP score means that the person's CP score is within the bottom 10% among all test participants. The total number of participants is 8,255. The number in this group is 894, and the ratio is 10.8%. The standard is the bottom 10% in CP. When we look at the average scores of their 6 ego states, CP is 22.8, NP is 31.8, A is 26.5, FC is 28.8, AC is 33.8, and SC is 26.1. Compared with the overall average, CP is 9.2 points lower than the overall average of 32.0. This group is a group of people with low CP. However, if we hold only the low CP, when analyzing them, the direction can become unclear. What we actually need to look at first in the graph is what remains relatively at the front inside this group. Inside this group, AC is the highest at 33.8. Next is NP at 31.8. In other words, as a result of low CP, a structure appears in which AC and NP remain relatively at the front. However, there is an important point here. A C and NP are relatively high within the person, but they are not higher than the overall average. AC is 0.5 points lower than the overall average of 34.3, and NP is 2.1 points lower than the overall average of 33.9. So it is an exaggeration to read this structure as people who adjust strongly or people who care very warmly. It is better to read it more accurately in this way. Overall, strong energy does not stand at the front, but within that structure, a flow that watches the relationship and adjusts softly remains relatively present. In ordinary relationships, these people may look at the atmosphere first rather than set strong standards. They may watch the other person's reaction and choose a direction that reduces friction. Rather than immediately drawing a line by saying, "This is not allowed," they are likely to speak indirectly, such as, "I think this may be a little difficult." Because MP remains relatively present, a flow of maintaining the relationship softly may also appear, rather than cutting the relationship off or organizing it coldly. However, NP is also not higher than the overall average. So it is closer to a soft response that tries not to harm the relationship than to strong care that actively takes care of and protects the other person. Because AC is relatively the most forward, this group may first check the other person's facial expression or the atmosphere. However, AC is also not higher than the overall average. So it is more natural to see it as a matching function that remains relatively at the front in a situation where the overall energy is low, rather than as a structure that is extremely sensitive to social cues. Because of this, when seen from outside, these people may appear quiet and moderate rather than leave a very clear impression. Rather than strongly leading a scene or setting standards, they may move in a direction that does not greatly shake the flow. The difficulty of this structure may appear in scenes where standards are needed. When the person has to state their own position clearly, divide the boundary of responsibility, or say, "This much is possible," but from here it becomes difficult. Their words may become delayed or unclear. Also, A and SC are relatively low together. When A is low, The force that structures the situation and makes a judgment may come forward less. When SC is low, the force that holds the person's own direction or personal color to the end may appear weakly. Because of this group is more likely to move by watching the other person and the atmosphere, so that the relationship does not break greatly, rather than by leading the scene with strong personal standards. It is better to read the nonverbal expressions mainly through AC and NP, which remain relatively at the front, rather than through low CP itself. The person may check the other person's facial expression first. The person may pause briefly before speaking and look at the atmosphere. The person may speak indirectly rather than directly opposing. The facial expression may move in a direction that adjusts softly rather than becoming strongly fixed. The direction of the body may also slightly move back or adjust to the other person rather than strongly moving forward. However, these expressions should not be described too strongly. This is because AC and NP are not higher than the overall average. So the nonverbal expressions of this group are closer to quiet checking, indirect response, and soft distance keeping than to strong adjustment or strong care. The tuning point is not to suddenly become strong. It is to bring small standards into words. This much is comfortable for me. I want to check this part again. That way is a little difficult for me. I think it would be good to decide it this way this time. These small sentences are not words that force CP to grow. They are practice in setting one's own standards little by little while not harming the relationship. To summarize, the core point when we look at people with low CP is not there are no standards. In the place where standards have become weaker, AC and NP remain relatively at the front. So the person tries to watch the relationship and hold balance softly. However, because AC and NP are also not higher than the overall average, it is better to read this not as a strongly visible feature, but as a flow that remains toward maintaining relationships within low overall energy.